Okay. So we don't need that.
Okay, just to see where I am.
Okay, sorry for that. So, anyway. The thing of it is, it's something that can also explore the memory of the reader. And that was part of my purpose. It's a novel written from a child's point of view. And along with the writer's dream stories, childhood perspectives, and memories, my deliberate purpose is to stimulate the recollection of the reader's own dreams, the recent and forgotten dreams. As I said, the book creates a visual language, a prose poem of free association and metaphor, and I use the vernacular sense specifically, which gives me a little bit more poetic freedom. Fire's Eternal Morning is written on multiple layers of allegory, thought, and perception. It's a coming-of-age story in the Cold War, which was inspired by Margaret Mead's anthropology, her book specifically, Coming of Age in Samoa. But this is more from a feared dream dimension of World War III, in which people have disappeared, leaving behind a world of hollowed halls, I call them. It's set in an actual place called Paradise Green, which is in Stratford, where I grew up, where the story follows the map of Dante's sojourn. The first part being the inferno of a nuclear catastrophe, then the purgatory of the emotions and political intrigues of the character's duplicitous identity, and 3, the paradise of mind and body. The story is of a young person trying to find his way back from the precipice of loss and fear in the aftermath of a global upheaval. The character, John Hoberk, picks his way through the rubble of cities, through the romantic hopes of his youth, and through the dirt paths of his childhood landscapes. Awakening in a state of amnesia, Hoberk thinks that the broken military weapon he finds at his side to be a child's toy. He may be a child of the Cold War, fantasizing the adult intrigues of espionage. He may be a soldier lost in the images of a nuclear inferno, lost in the images of his home, which he may never see or find again. Left abandoned in the ruins of a medieval town, Hoberk perceives himself in the backyard of his childhood near a place called Paradise Green. So, back around 2010, I started writing this essay, by which the purpose was to really kind of explain why I had constructed this novel in this fashion, which is sort of not really something that's acceptable to most publishers. So I was very fortunate in that regard to work with a group of poets. The distinctions between dream experiences and events in the real world appear to be a logical dichotomy. How do the premonitions and some dreams create a particular framework of time as it appears in the dream senses, compared with both the rational sense of time and the evolving of scientific understanding of time? So, as a literary device, the rhetorical principle of prolepsis is used as means of science fiction, by which the sense of prolepsis really is just the grammar sense, the grammar tense of it's called the future pluperfect, by which events are placed in the future as assuming that certain other events have led up to, also fictional, have led up to that point. So I want to do some reading here. The background has a lot to do with the development in the 1960s, especially Marshall McLuhan's book, which is called Understanding Media: The Extensions of Man. in which he describes, he starts off with as a historical event, the development of the printing press in the 1400s, and starts describing how each step of technology, especially electricity and, well, the press, for one thing, certainly oriented society in a certain way for hundreds of years. And then electricity and radio, film, and then television really oriented our culture, our whole civilization to, you know, what we think of now as sort of the advanced Western society. So so there is sort of a philosophical background to the work, essentially, and which is how I constituted the thinking of the connection between philosophy and psychology, and how we are really sort of affected by the psychological developments of the past 150 years, with how Freud really attributed his structure of how he delineated the mind into the superego, the ego, and the id, according to sort of suggestions from the Romantic poets and their work, and how the mystery of the mind and the individual had sort of developed over that period. So, so there really was a philosophical movement that really sort of accelerated from the time of the Renaissance, that where the control of the philosophy and theology really was sort of suddenly surpassed in secular humanism, and how that eventually led to the philosophical movements of Descartes and his non-rationalist methodology that he incorporated in ideas. So the reason I'm talking about this, I should say, is because this is really the background of the structure of why I continued on this path to create stories and a whole novel structure based on dreams, because the irrational patterns that occur in dreams largely remain mysteries to us, I think. No one really seems to know exactly what they are, and the behaviorists have tried to put them down into just, you know, you know, stories popping up out of just electrical impulses in the brain during sleep, which is really, you know, an oversimplification of why there are stories and why there are prophetic events that come out of dreams. We still don't know. You know, there's still a great deal of mystery. So, you know, the philosophical movement really started to catch up with that period, starting with Descartes and his ideas of in how there are certain innate ideas that were not part of the church's teaching that he instituted, that he, you know, promoted, and his, you know, reliance of mathematics to really back that up, and skepticism of perception. So, so in the understanding of fiction, I would say there's a couple of books have really influenced my thinking, or clarified it, in terms of E.M. Forster's book, Aspects of the Novel, is one that made distinctions between how characters, there are two separate ways that he developed. One where characters really sort of spoke out of the writer's principles, and sort of carried out a certain philosophy that the writer was you know, promulgating himself, and that's sort of in the way maybe he considered almost propaganda, where, and Tolstoy is one example of that, where his characters are always, you know, socially conscious and trying to, like, you know, great lords that are trying to give up all their lands to the poor, whereas Dostoevsky at the same time developed characters with complex minds and in many ways even self-contradictory impulses and behavior. So that's all I'll say about that. That's there have been some other examples of non-rational or surrealist writing. Certainly, James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, which is still pretty much incomprehensible to anyone trying to read it, unless one lived inside of Joyce's brain. It would be impossible to really interpret what he's talking about, and had only his specific experiences growing up and living in Dublin. Other writers like William Burroughs and Italo Calvino had, developed this amorphous literary form. So what's happening also is that there's been sort of a retraction from that kind of pioneering work in terms of language in publishing, because it's pretty much acknowledged that people don't understand those works, so it's not easily marketable. So what I wanted to do is read a couple of stories that sort of point out the work is very much an anti-war novel, and there is a level of complexity of the writer, of the main character, and how he's sort of been once he's trying to strike out on his own to get away from the things that are impinging on his life. On the other hand, he's sort of trapped by his associations with his family and with his friends in more complex ways than just having to attend family gatherings and be part of the family world, or at a time when there was a lot of things happening with the political underground. So but I thought I'd start with what I'm going to do is read the part of the first chapter last, but I will read two particular stories that sort of illustrate the element of childhood memories. And so this is part of chapter 3, which is called Topography, I think. And back as a small child, he was with his mother and little sister, Juno, after spending the afternoon shopping at Howland's and Levitt's department stores, and especially at H.L. Green's 5 and 10 cent store in downtown Bridgeport. It was a sunny afternoon on spring vacation, and now they were parked on a side street around the corner from the entrance of the Columbia Records factory on Barnum Avenue, where his father works. They're waiting for his dad to come out at 3:30. He was happy today because he had finally gotten something he had wanted for a long time. A beautiful set of tin soldiers with uniforms which looked like the armies of different countries of World War I. British grenadiers, US doughboys, and Germans with spiked helmets. Each one pointed a rifle or a pistol, standing crouched or prone on the ground. Waiting for his dad to come out of work, his mom and Juno are up in the front seat talking about girl stuff. So he starts setting up his army men, arranging them on the back seat facing each other from across the upholstery, rumpling his brown jacket across the seat to make hills and valleys and trenches for them to hide in ambush for each other. Since it's already warm outside, he also opens the door and moves the battle to the cliff of the edge of the seat and sets up the Germans below on the flat little metal ledge beneath where the back seat door closes. And the battle is poised to begin. There they are, crossing the field with the Allies above, ready to stop them from advancing. Suddenly, the car shakes as his dad opens the front door and jumps into the front seat, hugging and kissing Mom and Juno. But when Dad shuts the door, the car bounces again, and all the soldiers on the metal ledge, already unsteady, now start falling over. It's too late for him to catch them as they fall out of the car and tumble to the ground. "Oh no!" he yells, because he hadn't seen that the car was parked over a sewer grate, and the soldiers keep falling, already slipping down through the grate, and he is helpless to catch them. As the soldiers slowly drop and tumble down and down into the tiny bottomless pool deep under the street, for one instant he can first see his own face reflected from above before the water swallows them up forever, and his own reflected image breaks into small circles. Thank you very much. I have mixed feelings about reading this next story, but I really thought about it today and thought I would just go ahead and do it because it's a very personal memory that doesn't come from me, and it did come from a dream that I had, which seemed to have been something that was real from a family member, namely my father. It's called Bridge to the Chasm, 1944. Through woods of grass blade shadows, a memory reeled back from more than 20 years ago, even before his own 20 years. Deep bush and trees, climbing forest trails. This was somehow the mountain spine of Italy. I have to bury this map in my hand as soon as I memorize where I am. I have to bury this map in my hand as soon as I memorize where I am. The Apennines. Walking alone but not aimless. I had already parachuted and buried it away from where I had touched the ground. I tucked the small Beretta back into the ankle of my right boot between two layers of socks. Under my arm, a small canvas satchel carried the materials I will need. From this view on the mountain trail, I can see over the distant hillsides of Umbria, quaint villages with pink stucco buildings and the church steeple in the early morning angle of sunlight from the east. I'll have to climb through this rough terrain to get to the other side of a small ravine, though I was unlucky enough to twist my ankle badly when I hit the ground. Not the proper landing I was trained to do. So I now have to worry about getting back to my own unit, alive, without the fucking Germans seeing me. General Simone, my grandma's nephew, had handpicked me for this mission. Since I spoke all the dialects north and south like a real paisan, with Pop from Sicily, Mom from Ferrara. Uncle Simone and Pop had enlisted together in the Italian Engineer Corps back in 14. Then before I was even born, my little sister Hope, only 4, and Grandma died when the Austrians were shelling Ferrara in 17. Knocking out this bridge would prove my competence in being worthy of Simone recruiting me for the strategic services. Mussolini was now losing ground since we invaded the boot, and he'd soon be defeated, and then just the Nazis left. But I've got to remember to think only in Italian. Ehi Gianni, pensa soltanto in italiano. Ehi Gianni, pensa soltanto in italiano. If I could get to the other side of the valley, walking where I would probably come close to peasant houses, I'd be safer. I hadn't been in this province before, so I've got to watch out, not mistake anyone else to be my contact. fascisti instead of partisans. I hope no lookout saw my chute come down, black silk in the black sky. I would normally be thinking in Italian, except being scared I knew already what would happen if I forgot to speak Italian right away. If I could stop thinking in English. They might rattle off an English phrase to trip you up like, thank you, and you say, you're welcome. Even accidentally holding your knife and fork the American way in a cantina would land you in a torture chamber and then being stood up in front of a wall. All I could think about now was just meeting with my comrades to get back to the U.S. lines to the south tonight. A long walk already, but much longer with my aching ankle. They would be specifically looking for me in 2 hours. Still was no sign of my contact. 2 peasants were walking further along the path where I tried, a stocky tall men with dark hair and handlebar mustaches. Both carried beat-up looking Springfield rifles slung over their shoulders, inconclusive of who they might have issued them, maybe leftovers from the Great War. So I decided to just watch them until they moved beyond my area, but not to completely lose sight of them. The 2 stopped and sat on some large rocks where I hid, their voices just within earshot, talking about the new social republic and the news that Il Duce had just flown over to the Germans. The sound of their words drifted partly to the other direction, and I couldn't make out their conversation clearly enough to be sure of their loyalties. So I would just sit quietly until they decided to continue along in the early morning light. Finally, after more than a quarter of an hour, I was able to make my way deeper and deeper into the woods, careful not to break branches where I moved, now beginning to try to locate my objective. The chart I had committed to memory seemed slightly different from the actual lay of the land itself. But when I discovered my destination sometime later, and looked at my small timepiece, I realized how much later I was now because it was necessary to stop to avoid these 2 peasants. The bridge over the gorge in the mountainside was wide enough and apparently strong enough to allow Panzer tanks and half tracks to pass over another road leading to Rome. By the time I had installed the explosive under the 2nd and 3rd bridge supports, I realized that the sun was higher in the sky than I hoped it would be by now. The timepiece said, 08:10 hours. I was just able to get the detonator wire stretched to a safe distance away when I began to hear the sounds of a mechanized unit approaching. They were 10 minutes early. Shit! Fucking stupid goose steppers. Shit! They were now already coming onto the bridge. This is not what I wanted to happen. I could have just done the damn bridge and gotten the fuck out of here, with no damn danger to myself or having to kill anyone. But Simone's orders were precise, and I was much more likely to get home than they were now. Nazi infantrymen were already in the middle of the crossing, 2 tanks rumbling up the line behind them, then a half-track already off the terra firma. They're smart enough to break their march step. Why did they have to be so damned early? What could I do now? This could only mean certain death to all these men and disaster to their wives waiting for them back home as mine waited for me. I would be damned for this, by God, just for touching the 2 ends of these wires to the poles of this little battery. But fuck Hitler and his death camps. I knew the rumors were true after Simone showed me the secret aerial recon photos, trains of cattle cars and rail tracks leading to resettlement camps, they call them, to which all the Jews of Europe were being brought. Though the number of barracks remained the same, just a river of people being brought in every day and no one gets out. And the camp doesn't grow in size. But oh God, how could I get out of this? The rumbling of the engines vibrated the supports of the bridge, but not enough for them to give way by themselves. I had to shut my eyes tighter and tighter, wondering if I could do it with my eyes closed. Maybe not, as I felt the hot sparks snap between my fingers. I will pray for you men about to pay the highest price. Mother Maria, forgive my soul. The dark velvet inside of my eyes suddenly flared to deafening white orange, a horrendous deafening blast of plastique and the thundering sounds of men in heavy vehicles falling forward into the chasm, soldiers, jangling utensils, helmets, rifles discharging, and terrified cries. I lost my dad when he was 60, and it was a very difficult relationship that we had. But I realized he had been through a lot in his life, and he didn't have respect for who I was, but I understood why. As I said before. So, thank you. Okay, I'm just going to read a couple more pages of from the first chapter, the opening of the book, and the first chapter is called "Distant Fires," and it was still the morning of fires, the whisper of distant fires which would never stop. "This is damn silly," his voice said over the surface of the deep. Finally, his mind was speaking again. He could hear the words forming their own sounds, suspended above the vastness of everything gone, waking his attention to the pathetic, puzzling projections on the orange velvet inside of his eyelids. Pictures of past ancient weeks, beneath the weighted lids, consciously focused. A cold gray cloud in the sky above, covering over the thought of a cold war still hanging icily down from the sky. One mid-morning in early October, Miss Brantley was giving the history class to her third grade class, giving history lessons to her third grade class. Christopher Columbus believed that the world was round, but he couldn't convince anyone else. He believed that there was a shorter way to get to China than the long trip through the Indian Ocean. The people of Europe wanted wonderful spices and silks from Asia, but it was still being taught in the schools that the world was flat. Columbus visited the kings and queens of Italy and Portugal, but finally in 1492, Queen Isabella of Spain believed him and persuaded her husband, King Ferdinand, to give Columbus 3 ships to sail straight to China. What? Wondered Holberg. But 2 desks ahead of him, Bill flashed his drawing pan with a scribbled robot cat, and Holberg broke out laughing. Miss Brantley got frantic. "John Holberg, you're going to the principal's office in 10 seconds. That shut him up. Then they had their air raid drill, all of them dashing out into the hallway to crouch and cringe against the wall. But Holberg kept looking over at the wide window panels at the end of the corridor. But they knew what it would be like. They knew there was a huge Army helicopter factory, Sikorsky's, only a few miles away. Some of their dads worked there. And they knew the big bomb would shatter everything in on them in a terrible shower of glass and fire, or maybe just vaporize us, all in a blinding flash of negative atomic light. They could do that. Like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, even bigger. What had happened had been so easy to see coming that no one believed that it would really happen. Yet everyone had lived in its fear, knowing its irrevocable outcome. Everything sucked into the final conflict, like the rush at the inside of a funnel cloud running over the long meadow of past time. The world had often come close to the edge of disaster. Like just a few years before, when Hobart was 15 and they took their seats on the school